In college, there was a guy on our floor named Steve, who was studying evolutionary psych, and was constantly conducting different psychological tricks and experiments on us. They were all pretty cool and challenged us to think outside the boundaries of our minds. One night, he came back with a mirror game. It was similar to other dares and challenges involving mirrors like Bloody Mary or Candyman. Only in this case, the villain that showed up in the reflection was you. Kind of. The game involved perception, namely your perception of yourself. From there, it expanded outwardly, encompassing other people and places and their relations to you. All you needed was yourself, a mirror, in complete concentration. I had a mirror, but it was a long week and all I wanted to do was sleep, so I stayed in. A floor-wide email was sent out inviting everyone to try it in their rooms. The game was called the Je me vu challenge. Je me vu is a French phrase and translates to being the literal opposite of déjà vu, whereas the latter, déjà vu, translate to already seen. Je me vu translates to never seen. In a psychological sense, it relates to the phenomenon of experiencing a situation that should be familiar, but is instead foreign and unrecognizable. Seeing things or people that you should know, but for some reason, they appear as strangers or unknowns. Everyone has experienced some form of this in their life. An easy example would be if you've ever been looking for something in your home. After minutes of searching, you finally locate it in a place you know you checked multiple times. But for some reason, it blended into the surroundings and its familiarity made it invisible, or temporarily unknown. The Je me vu challenge was grounded in this idea. The challenge played with our own perception of who we are, and had very simple directions. You had to be alone in front of a mirror, and you had to keep it close to your face. Then, you have to stare into your own eyes and say your name repeatedly. The name repetition and eye contact with your reflection allowed you to accelerate the familiarity you had with your name and face. The object was to say your name so many times the word no longer made sense to you, while at the same time concentrating on your face so diligently you no longer recognize it. I wouldn't recommend it, but if you're brave enough, you can try it. You'll be surprised with how quickly your name means nothing, and your face becomes a stranger's. How the sounds and syllables turn alien in your eyes, nose, and lips morph into an outsider's. The challenge, if done correctly, made you forget who you were. So in a sense, it shaved you down to your most basic human instincts. It reminded me of a story I once heard from a drama teacher. She had a student who was quiet and reserved, and had a hard time breaking out of her shell. The teacher convinced her to do a heavy scene that involved a loud scream at the end. The student played the part well, but couldn't manage the scream in the finale. The teacher pushed the student and kept at her, trying to pull out something deeper. Then she did. The student began to scream, a horrific guttural shriek, and she wouldn't stop. She just kept going. The teacher tried to calm her down. The other students tried as well, but it was like a switch had been flipped deep inside the student, and some electrical bolt of emotional fear charged through her. The screams were terrifying. They were animalistic. They sounded far down the evolutionary rabbit hole. The student found something somewhere inside of her that was so unsettling it made several other students throw up. An ambulance eventually arrived and the student was taken away. Even as she was driven off, you could hear her screaming. The teacher never saw or heard of the girl again, which was annoying because I wanted to know more. I always pictured the student in some asylum, probably sedated, her vocal cords numbed down, but still trying to scream, the switch inside of her somehow still stuck in the on position. My roommate Allie told me she was joining the challenge, and was doing it next door. I had zero interest in that and fell asleep on the couch. A storm hit that night. I woke up just before midnight from knocks at the door between claps of thunder. The knocks were uneven and strange, and the door was unlocked. I opened it to find Allie. She was frazzled and nervously trembling as she looked in at me. I warmingly reached out to wave her in, but she pulled back. Allie looked at me like I was someone she didn't recognize or know or trust. She looked back down the hall, which I realized had smoke gathering in the air. I peeked out and saw the smoke coming from a room down the hall. I heard movements and struggling sounds coming from the rooms. Everything felt off. I reached forward again, warmingly, and this time Allie was receptive. I put my arm around her and guided her in. She became like a baby under my arm, infant-like, as if needing protection. I tried to talk to Allie, but she wasn't speaking right. Her words were coming out in long, strangely connected mumbles. They sounded backwards and upside down, like a stroke having a stroke. I brought Allie to the bathroom and closed the door to give her privacy. She behaved like she didn't want me to leave her, but was unable to speak the words. It was also bizarre. I felt like I was still sleeping. I panicked, wondering if I should call the RA or go straight to calling an ambulance. Then I heard a scream. It was from somewhere on our floor, further down the hall near the rec room. Then the fire alarm went off, and another, but just as soon as they did, I heard 3 loud individual cracks, and the ringing shorted out. I tried calling Steve. I could hear his cell phone ringing somewhere in the hallway. It continued ringing all the way into voicemail. No one answered. I tried again, but nothing. It kept ringing until it stopped. I waited a few minutes until the hallway had been quiet long enough. Then I grabbed a pen-sized can of pepper spray and quietly opened the door and peeked out. It reeked of burnt toast. The hall was filled with smoke now, and I could barely see the next door. I crept along the wall, passing the closed doors of other students' rooms. Behind some of the doors, there were sounds. Unintelligible mumbles and cries. My plan was to get to Marie's room. She was our RA, and her room was at the far end of the hallway near the kitchen area. I continued along the hall and passed through the rec room. The TV was on, and an old episode of Jeopardy was playing. Lachlan, one of the guys on our floor, was sitting in front of the TV, staring mindlessly and mumbling the same way as Allie. He made me uneasy, and he wasn't acting like the normal guy I would watch shotgun beers in the bathroom stalls. I backed up, deciding to go back to my room and try calling Mary instead. I turned back to the hallway and the cloud of smoke. There was a crying sound coming from deep within it. Between the sobs, there were jumbles and backwards words. That same stroke-like cadence. It was a sad, disturbing crying that made me want to run back to my room and bolt the door. The silhouette got closer and turned into Laura, another student. Laura's room was down the hall near the staircase. She was stumbling towards me, her hands cupped out in front of her. She was trying to speak, but crying through it. Laura tripped, falling forwards, her hands out, pleading for some kind of sustenance. I didn't know what to do, so I backed up, and just as I did, a new shadow appeared. It was Steve, and he'd lost his mind. Steve was swinging one of his baseball bats, which was covered in blood. He, himself, was also covered in blood and his clothes were ripped and shredded. His eyes were wild and he was screaming violent jumbles of words. Steve didn't see me, but he saw Laura. He grunted at her and swung the bat viciously. The bat connected with the side of Laura's head, sending her sprawling into a room. Steve followed her in, swinging the bat like he was playing whack-a-mole. Laura's screams and cries drowned out and were replaced by the slapping thud of Steve's bat against flesh and bone. I rushed across the doorway and tried to make it down the hall, but Steve heard me and chased me down. Steve got a hold of me 2 doors down from my own. He had one arm around me and was trying to pull me to the ground. I got a hand free and pulled out my pepper spray. I struggled and fought and managed to press it right into one of his eyes while I was shooting it. Steve screamed and let go of me. I shoved him back and ran through the smoke. I got inside my room and locked the door. He never came to the room, but I heard him crying and hitting the walls as he patrolled the hall. I got a knife from my mini kitchen and went to check on Allie. I found her huddled up in the far end of the bathtub. She reached out to me like a child would its mother. I spent the next hour holding her and rocking her to sleep. Campus and state police arrived and cleared all the rooms. They found us in the bathtub. Allie was still spouting gibberish, but I could speak and told them what I knew. As we were escorted out of our room and down the hall, I saw numerous body bags in rooms and the kitchen. I knew Laura had died, but it didn't hit me until then how much larger this all was. In the end, it turned out that Steve had killed 7 students and the RA Marie. Allie eventually recovered, regaining her memory of self and others. Steve was sent to an asylum. He's very lucid and normal now as well, but he has a strange animal quality to his eyes. Like everything he looks at is prey. Most people would be terrified if they looked in the mirror and what they saw back wasn't their face, but their character. And it's made me wonder what mine would have looked like if I'd done the Je m'avoue challenge. If I would have been like Steve and fallen into a deep evolutionary well that supercharged my limbic system. If the lizard tail in my amygdala would have brought me back to infancy or turned me into something dangerous. I'll never know. I don't know what's wrong with other teenagers. Always sulking in their room. Phone or computer inches away from their face. Messy room, messy hair, messy schoolwork. So many emails from school reporting on fights or schoolwork not being done. That's what I've noticed about my son Rupert. He's 16 years old and hasn't had a single incident up to this day. He's never sad as far as I know. He's never drank alcohol or done drugs. Never missed an assignment. Has friends and is always going out with them. His room is always miraculously clean when I come in. And he takes weirdly much care of himself for a boy. Showers every day, brushes his teeth, flosses, applies lotion after every shower. I know because he always comes out smelling like lavender after a shower. His hair is always in place and clean. I don't think I've ever seen it greasy or oily. At first, I thought he was gay. Don't blame me, I've never seen a straight boy or man ever take such good care of himself before in my life. all the males in my life have only cared about games or girlfriends, not how they got a single pimple on their forehead and going to the dermatologist about it. Then, things began getting weird. Rupert would stay in his room for hours in front of the computer, and I would hear the shower turn on and off again and again. Then, I would notice him trying to sneak in cutlery into his room. The other day, I caught him sneaking a few forks, spoons, and knives upstairs. I stopped him. "Rupert, why are you taking those to your room?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "Mom, I need it for a project, okay?" With that, he ran upstairs and locked himself in his room. When I demanded he open the door, he wouldn't. Why is my child not listening to me anymore? What's wrong with my sweet little boy? Later, I noticed Rupert began going out a lot more. He would leave in the evening and come back way later than he should have. For example, at 2:30 a.m. I would grill him out about it, but he wouldn't listen. Eventually, I had to lock his window shut and lock the front and back door. I told him that he wasn't allowed to go out for more than 5 hours, and he must always be home by 11 p.m. It might sound harsh, but it was the only way to keep him in order. After that, I began noticing changes in his schoolwork. He used to be an A+ student, the top of every class. I started receiving emails from the school, telling me he's missed many important projects, tests, and homework. Things started spiraling out of control. Whenever I would enter Rupert's room, there would be a terrible smell, and I would notice his dirty socks and underwear on the floor. I would yell at him to clean them, but he wouldn't. So eventually, when things got worse, I had to clean his room myself. Since he wouldn't let me go into his room alone, I waited until he was out with his friends. I went into his room and locked the door. I started taking things off the floor and putting them in their places. After I'd done a simple tidy of his room, I stepped into his bathroom and I gagged. The bathtub was filled with water, but the water was a faded red. There were 2 girls in the water, their eyes glassy and lifeless, staring at the ceiling. Their faces were severely beaten and cut. I slowly realized what happened to them as I took in the stabs, the pokes, the chunks of human skin lying on the floor just under me, and the cutlery in the bathtub floating around. I put a hand to my mouth. I fled out of the bathroom, taking deep breaths and circling around his room. Suddenly, I noticed crumpled paper in front of his computer. I picked it up and started reading. May 5th, 2022. Mama expects much from me. I know she hates messy things and messy people. I've seen her rant about Miss Sally's son, James, who's a drug addict and a C+ student. Horrible, she had said. Just terrible. That little punk. How can he live with a life so miserable? I don't want Mama talking about me like that. It makes me scared, dizzy. I need to try harder for her. I need to be perfect for her. August 8th, 2022. I've began being better, Mama. I clean my room, I do my homework, I study. I do my best, and I hope you're happy, Mama. It takes a lot of time and energy to be the perfect son for you, but I will do it. I promise I will do it. November 8th, 2022. Mama asked me about the forks and knives today. I didn't tell her anything. She doesn't have to know. I know she'll worry. I don't want her to worry. Good kids never make their parents worry. I am a good kid. I will be. December 8th, 2022. Mama screams at me for coming home late. Why am I such a bad son? Good sons don't make their moms scream. I've made mine angry. I'm not perfect. Mama hates me. I hate me. I hate being messy and sad and pathetic because Mama hates it. I want to be perfect. I want to be clean, but I'm not. And Ashley is, Sarah is. Mama talks good about them. Good girls, she says. They are perfect. They're cool and popular and have good friends and good grades and a good life. I want to be them. They make me angry. Why can't I be like them? Why? January 8th, 2023. Now Ashley and Sarah aren't perfect. They aren't better than me. I am better than them. I will always be perfect for Mama now. She can't talk about them anymore. She has to talk good about me. I am perfect, the perfect son. February 8th, 2022. Mama, am I perfect? Do I make you proud? Ashley and Sarah are gone now. They aren't perfect. They're miserable and sad and dead. I am not. I am good, Mom. I'm a good son, right? Tell me, Mama, because I know you are reading this. I crumple the paper more and throw it on the floor, kicking it with my bare feet. Suddenly, I hear thumps coming up the stairs, and my Rupert's voice. Happy. He tries to open the door, it won't open. He starts banging on the door. His silhouette blocks the orange light coming from the hallway. His shadow is tall and scary from where I'm standing. He bangs harder, he laughs louder. He screams happier. I am perfect, Mama, he screams, right? He keeps saying that again and again, banging on the door. The door won't budge. For 2 hours, I stay in his room because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't. My phone isn't with me. For those 2 hours, Rupert has only said one thing. Right? And the door is beginning to creak. The hinges moan. He bangs harder. My heart thuds. My son Rupert is perfect. I was sitting at my desk, staring at my computer and surfing the internet. I know Halloween is basically 2 months away, but still. It's better to just have everything beforehand. I'm big on eBay and Etsy, supporting small businesses. So after spending like 20 minutes on eBay and finding nothing I liked, it was onto Etsy. The first thing I typed into the search bar was scary masks, and then waited for results. I scrolled down a bit, then came across a profile with a picture I recognized from an artist I liked. I clicked on the picture and watched as my screen switched itself to their profile. Assuming by the name Brandon Goner, they were probably a guy. I looked at his About Me and it said he made masks and props. I clicked away and looked over his profile more. He followed no one and he also had no followers. His favorited shops were public, and the only thing he had favorited was a knife shop. He also had 2 collections of his own products. One was labeled masks and the other props. I clicked on masks and scrolled through. All of the masks were what seemed to be human and animal faces, all made with surprising detail. Unlike the human ones, the animal ones seemed to be made to give off the appearance of being stretched. Honestly, it kinda creeps me out how realistic they were, as if he had actually stretched the face of a real animal. I singled out one of the masks, a mask that appeared to be the face of a man, with rugged cream skin and a scar dragging itself along its cheek. Freckles were littered across its face, and it had a little stubble. Again, the attention to detail was incredible, and it would be great for a costume I had in mind. I quickly got my credit card from my drawer and bought the mask. When I had officially confirmed the order, I wasn't expecting to get a message from Brandon. "Brandon Goner, thanks for the purchase, you're my first buyer." Me: "Oh, no problem. I just needed a mask for Halloween and yours looked pretty cool." He replied, "I'm gonna throw in a few extra treats for you. A couple props maybe. And an animal mask since you were so kind." Me: "You really don't have to. You should sell those." He replied again, No, I need them off my back. They're taking up space in my apartment." After that, I didn't reply. I waited with anticipation until my package came the following Monday. The box was bigger than I expected. It was a plain cardboard box with no stickers or writing on it at all, which was strange. But I knew it had to be my order. I wasn't expecting anything else. But the smell was even stranger. I could smell it before I even opened the box. It was putrid and sour. I tried to breathe through my mouth, but could taste it on my tongue. So I immediately closed my mouth. I sat down on my couch, package in my lap, and a knife by my side. As I drug my knife through the tape, my roommate came up behind me, his hand gripping the couch. "Hey Carrie." He looked over my shoulder. "What's that?" I drug my knife through the rest of the tape and opened the box. "Oh, nothing, just stuff I got for Halloween." The mask I had originally ordered was on top of everything else. Nothing was wrapped, just lazily thrown on top of each other. I spotted a cat mask under my human one, making itself quite noticeable with its orange fur. I picked up the human mask and examined it. There were threads in the cheeks connecting themselves behind the face, which was probably so I could put it on and wear it, just like a normal mask. I ran my hand over the cheeks and immediately drew back. It felt like real skin, like my skin. "Freaky," Jaden said, leaning over the couch. "I know, right?" I said, turning my head to look at him. His mouth was turned down into a frown, and his eyebrows were furrowed. "That looks super real. What else is in there? You got props?" He reached over my shoulder, pulled a hand out of the box, and then dropped it immediately. "Ew." He drew his hand back and wiped it on the couch like it had something on it. "What is that made of?" "I have no idea. Weird, right?" I grabbed the mask and waved it jokingly in front of Jaden's face, earning a loud groan and an eye roll. He shoved my hand away and looked at me again. "That smells like literal death. Are you seriously gonna wear it?" "Duh, I'll just wipe it down or something." I put the mask back in the box and closed it. "I don't know what I'm going to do with all the random body parts though. Just keep them away from me. And for the love of God, please put that in your room before it smells everything up," he called, walking over to the kitchen. "I should put it in your room. It already reeks of weed and BO," I told him as I stood up, the box in my arms. "It does not," he said, opening the fridge. "Whatever," I mumbled, walking to my room. I put the box in my closet, pushing it over on the top shelf above my clothes. I really hoped it wouldn't stink up my closet or my clothes. I went to my bed and sat down, pulling out my phone and checking my notifications. The local news app I was subscribed to had posted a new article. It was headlined, "Man Found Dead in Park." Police say it's the most gruesome thing they've ever seen. I won't take a screenshot since it won't allow me to. I'll just copy and paste some of it down below. At 6:22 a.m., the police got a call from a woman going on a jog at Redacted Park. Upon the police's arrival, she claims to have spotted a leg poking out of a bush, and went to check who it may have been. When she went to go check, she found that the leg wasn't attached to a body, prompting her to call the police. At first, I thought maybe it was just a prop, like a gag someone left there to freak people out. But the smell was so bad. It looked so real, she said. Police searched the park and found a dead cat and man. His leg was missing, matching up with the one that the jogger had found in the bushes. The police did not find a collar on the cat, nor did they find a face. The man currently remains unidentified, as his face was missing as well as one of his hands. The investigation will continue and the woman will be brought into questioning as well as other possible suspects. They did write more, but I didn't find it necessary to post all of that. I removed the park's name since it's not really a good idea to post the location of a park located right by where you live. I know I'm probably overreacting. Like I don't even know what that man looked like, or the cat. But it was so near to my house and they looked so real. The coincidence is insane, and the smell is so bad. Like it's actually rotting. As I'm writing this, I can smell the stink leaking out of my closet. I was really just gonna leave it and ignore it, but I don't know if I should take it to the police or not. And a couple of minutes ago, I got this message from the seller. It's like he knows I'm thinking about it, and I'm really regretting buying from him. Brandon Goner. Did you like the masks? Sorry about the smell, by the way. The guy I got it from really stunk. When I was 10, my mother took my older brother and I on a picnic to Newman's Lake, about a half-hour drive from our house. She'd been looking for cheap ways to get us out of the house for the summer, and this was one of many picnics. This one in particular, however, stood out, because it's when I found out how I would die. Nobody swims in Newman's Lake. Nobody smart does anyways. There are signs every few feet leading up to the water's edge that warn about alligators. Every once in a while you'd hear talk of drunk teenagers who fell in, and the grisly fate they'd suffered. All this to say, I knew that when I died in Newman's Lake, it would be no accident that got me in the water, after we'd had our little sandwiches and fruit snacks by the water. My mom sat on the blanket to read a romance novel, and left my brother and I to our own devices. My brother ran to the nearby woods to find a good walking stick, and I slowly made my way to the rickety little dock that stretched nearly to the center of the lake. It looked ancient, like any sudden move would collapse it, and there was no railing between the decaying wood and the algae green lake. As I approached, I felt a sudden bout of dread. Did I really think it was wise to walk along the barely standing dock? Yet still, as if compelled, I walked forward. I knew that the moment I looked at the water, I'd lose my resolve. So as I walked along the pier, I steadied my own feet against the wood. It felt like a balancing act, simply to avoid the obvious rotten holes in the wood. But eventually, I reached the end of the pier and looked out into the green water. As soon as I did, I felt the water pulling me in, begging me to look closer. For just a moment, I did. I looked at the weeds along the sand, and at the snails and small fish in the water. And beneath all of it, almost as if it were on another deeper layer that no one else could access, I saw a jet black fish made of smoke. It was about the size of a goldfish, and it swirled within itself like a cloud of dark, spinning sand. I knew what it was the second I saw it. It was my death. I didn't know how I knew, and I didn't know when it would get me. But I knew what it was. I knew it meant that one day, be it soon or in the distant future, I would step off the pier at Newman's Lake and into the disgusting water, and I would let myself drown. Some things cannot be explained by the realm of the natural. I understood that it was strange that I could see my own death, but I also understood it as fact rather than opinion. As soon as the blackfish noticed me looking at it, it hid among the weeds. I knew it wouldn't come out while I was still there, so I walked back along the dock back to my mom. It was odd. After witnessing your own death, you'd think I'd be afraid, but instead, I just felt empty, as if my own demise were sad, but not something to dwell on. And in a way, it wasn't like I'd learned anything new that day. I'd already known that I'd die one day. It wasn't as if I'd learned when I would die. Just how. I simply told myself that I wouldn't go back to the lake. Not for a long time. And I let myself believe it. The next summer, when my mom asked if I wanted to go to Newman's Lake for another picnic, I suggested we go to a local park instead. My mother seemed confused, but off to the park we went, and we all had a good time. It continued like this each year, with me finding some excuse not to go back to Newman's Lake. It continued until I was 17. My friends, Sam, Jason, and I were drinking cheap beer at Jason's parents' house while they were out of town. We'd played so many times that we'd run almost completely out of truth or dare questions when Sam asked me the truth of how I wanted to die, and I answered as honestly as I could that it didn't matter how I wanted to die, that death was waiting for me already assigned at the bottom of Newman's Lake. I should have known not to tell them something like this. Should have known when Jason's mouth formed a tiny O and his brow furrowed, or when Sam laughed out loud. But I was drunk and they were my friends, and I thought they'd at least understand. I should have protested when Sam, the most sober of us, dragged Jason and I into his old minivan, but I didn't. I didn't want to be seen as a baby. So when they suggested we go to the pond, I went with them. My friends didn't need to know the dread that filled my entire body on the drive over, or the chills on the back of my neck when I realized that I wanted to go back. They didn't need to know that when they started heckling me to approach the now nearly falling over pier, it took almost no effort on their part. They didn't need to know that I felt the strangest sense of home from deep within the murky depths of the water. As I performed the balancing act to the end of the pier yet again, my friends didn't follow. I couldn't tell if it was fear of falling into the water or fear of whatever was clearly happening to me. I didn't care. I reached the end of the dock, and in the water yet again I saw it. It was still as pitch black as before, but now about the size of my hand. Because it was bigger now, I could more clearly see the swirling patterns within the fish. The extra plane of space it seemed to occupy beneath everything else. It was disorienting to watch, and yet, I couldn't seem to pull my eyes away from it. It didn't seem to shy away from my gaze this time, but stayed completely still as if to let me watch the patterns on its back. I was mesmerized, and if my friends hadn't been behind me yelling my name, I don't know how long I would have stood there. I walked back to the edge of the lake and saw them looking terrified. "What the hell was that?" Sam asked, his voice almost accusatory. "I told you, I'm going to die here one day. Some things are just meant to happen," I said blankly, already missing the sound of the water jostling the dock. Sam looked at me like I was stupid, but Jason nodded grimly. I wondered if he too had seen his death. I wondered how many people had seen their death, as I had felt the iron grip it seemed to have on me. The car ride back was mercifully silent, Sam in disbelief of my behavior, Jason giving me my much needed space. We went back to Jason's parents' house and continued our game of truth or dare, without another word of death. As the years passed, I grew wary of getting too close to people. In my dreams, I was already under the gentle waves of the lake. What use would friends be when I eventually succumbed? After high school, I got a part-time job and took college classes online. With no real friends, no romantic prospects, and no hobbies. Sometimes I felt like the cool water would be a mercy from the prison of homework and petty work drama. It was around that time I started visiting the lake, pretty much daily. My job at a local sporting goods store was a short drive from it, and after every shift I drive to the lake, sit at the end of the pier and talk to the fish that was my death. I started telling it stories about my life. It felt natural that the thing that would end it should know about my life. Sometimes I'd smoke cigarettes, or on especially bad days just play music without speaking. Those were the days I most thought about jumping in, though in retrospect, I thought about it every day. I dreamt of it. I began to look forward to getting off work and going to the lake. The fish was getting bigger and harder to miss when I searched the depths of the murky water. While at first it had shied away, it was now impossible to miss, practically the size of a shark. Sometimes I could swear it was reacting to my voice, shimmying its fins in this way or that to signify it was listening. And each day I got closer to the water. Not so close as to fall in, or to be pulled in by the massive fish, but close enough that I could observe the tiny colonies under the water, and to wish that I could join them. It was around that time that Jason showed up at my doorstep. He'd moved away after high school to go to a university, and we'd lost touch after that. I'd left my parents' home, but not the town itself. He seemed nervous, but I invited him in and we caught up for a while before I asked him about the nature of his unannounced visit. He hesitated but overcame his anxiousness to look serious for just a moment. "Do you remember that time in high school when we got you drunk and you told us how you were going to die?" He practically whispered. I nodded. Jason began again. "I know how you feel. I see it everywhere. When I'm driving, I see it pulling me towards the oncoming traffic. When I'm at home, I feel it pulling me towards the kitchen knives or rope. I can sense it with me at all times. But I just wanted to tell you, it's not set in stone. You don't have to listen. I was horrified. I never knew that while I was fighting my battle with the lake, Jason fought just as hard. In this shared kinship, I felt happy for the first time in a long time. I'd avoided making connections for so long that it felt odd welcoming someone into my life, but I knew it was what had to be done. Thank you, it's good to know that I'm not alone. I'm here for you anytime you need me, I told him. My death still calls to me. Sometimes I still even feel the urge to go to the lake and visit. But I know that death will welcome me with open arms like an old friend, and I don't want it to catch me with my guard down. Jason and I are friends, and we help each other through difficult days. The days where I dream about the sweet cocoon of water all around me, or Jason holds a knife in his hand as if it were attached. I do not belong at the bottom of the lake, no matter how it calls to me. And with Jason by my side, I hope that we can eventually die by anything other than our own hands. And would you like more eggs, honey? My mom asked my 4-year-old son Danny as we sat at the breakfast table. Yes. My mother started piling more eggs onto his plate, to which he started wailing, I said yes. My mom gave my wife and I a confused look. I'm sorry, Danny, does yes mean something different in your home? She asked. No, Mom, we're sorry. Danny's been getting his words mixed up. We are going to take him to a speech therapist once we get home. Just last week, he threw a tantrum at daycare because he said no to a cookie, and was upset that all the other kids got one and he didn't. I said as my mom picked him up, well, if you say so, I'll go give Danny a bath, and then we can go head out to the London Eye. Are you excited to go on the big Ferris wheel, love? My mom asked. No, Danny excitedly exclaimed, throwing his hands into the air, and we all laughed. This trip was almost perfect. It was the first time my American wife and son had visited my hometown of London, and so far we were all having so much fun. The only thing to put a damper on our vacation was my son's constant mixing up of yes and no. I should have got it checked out long ago, I know, but I guess I thought it was cute, and now I worry it was too late. My wife Laura seemed to think the same thing. Mark, we really should get Danny's speech checked. It could cause some problems later on. My wife said, I mean, it's bad enough when he got a British accent from hanging around you. Well, like father like son, I joked, and we laughed. Just then, my mom walked towards us, Danny in towel. He was holding his favorite stuffed animal, a Dalmatian plush he called Doggy, in his hands. He insisted on bringing Doggy along with him on our trip. Are you sure, love? I don't want Doggy to get lost, my mom said. No, I'm bringing him, Danny said stubbornly, and I laughed as I hoisted him up onto my shoulders. It really was a lovely day. We walked around London, took Danny and my wife to ride on their first ever double-decker bus, rode the London Eye, all that touristy stuff. We ended it off by getting Danny some ice cream. Danny still kept all of his energy throughout the day. Even as the adults slowly got more tired, he was running up ahead of us, which my mom and I had no problem with. We both grew up here, we knew the area. Once he got out of our eyesight though, we began to call him back. Danny, Danny, I called, but he didn't come back. After 2 hours of searching, we called the police. After 2 days of searching, he was officially reported missing. I ruined my life looking for him. I made Laura sell our house in the USA so we could move in with my mom to continue searching for him. Every day, I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to search the city, not coming home until 10 p.m. that night. I wouldn't eat with my mom and Laura. In fact, most days I wouldn't eat at all. I became more irritated by small things. I started taking my anger out on Laura. Every week, I'd send in a new police report, hoping they would do something about it. They never did. There was never enough evidence, they would say. It's a cold case. Laura left me 3 years after Danny disappeared. She said she had to move on. It was time I did the same. Mom died from a heart attack 6 years after that. I was alone. No son, no wife, no mom. And it was all my fault. Danny had been gone for 9 years. He would have been 13 now. Then I heard something that rocked my world. I was sitting at the table, the same table Danny ate his last meal at. Eggs, which he didn't even like. The news report came on, saying that the police had just busted a 9-year-long child slavery scheme in the middle of London. They were now rescuing all the kids. 9 years in London. I knew I had to find my son. I sprinted out the door, running through the town, trying to find it. There, by the abandoned building I had passed so many times, was a huge section covered in caution tape and surrounded by officers. I could see hundreds of dirty, skinny children, and I knew Danny could be in there. I tore through the caution tape as police chased after me. I screamed my son's name as I avoided all the officers. Then, something dropped at my feet. It looked like a lumpy, dirty rag, but upon further inspection, I could see it was Doggy. "Daddy?" a boy said. He was about 3 feet taller now, dirty, and thin as a stick. But under all that grime, I knew this was Danny. "Oh, my boy, I yelled, throwing my arms around him. At last, I had finally found my son, who I spent 9 miserable years looking for. That's when the police caught up to me. 3 restrained me while the 4th approached my son. "Boy, do you know this man?" He turned to me. "If he doesn't, we'll have to arrest you until further notice." I looked to my son, pleading to him with my eyes. "Danny, please," I whispered. The 3 policemen tightened their grips around me. Danny looked to me, then back to the officer. "No," he said, and the 3 policemen all picked me up with ease and carried me to their police van. "Danny, wait, Danny. That's my son. He's my son. I loved him with all my heart. You can't take him away from me again." And as we drove away, I could see Danny one last time. He followed me with his eyes and mouthed one last thing to me. "Bye, Daddy." Yup, just about as crazy as the title sounds. My dad is what they call a macho man. All he wanted was sons. He lived and breathed for another Keller boy. Naturally, when my older brother was born, he was overjoyed. 3 years later, he begged my mom to have another son. When he found out we were twins, he was excited to have 3 sons. So when my brother and I came out, and he saw I was a girl, he was despaired. I've always been his least favorite kid, and he never tried to hide it. While he named my brothers Anthony and David, which mean priceless and beloved respectfully, he named me Lilith, which literally means night monster. While my brothers and mom tried to soften that direct punch to the gut by calling me Lily, he insisted on them all calling me Lilith, so I could feel the disappointment that he felt the day I was born. Clearly him and my mom did not stay married, and quite unfortunately he signed for full custody when Anthony was 5 and David and I were 2. Things just got worse from there. If he took Anthony and David out to eat or to see a movie, I was to stay home. He spent all his time playing sports with my brothers, and he wouldn't let me join even though I, as a girl, actually showed a genuine interest in what he was doing with my brothers. When I was 4, Dad got cancer, and from what I heard, it was supposed to be terminal. That's where the title of this story comes into play. Yup, he made a deal with Satan. 15 more years of his life if he sold one of his children's souls. And big surprise, he chose me. So once I die, it's off to hell, no matter how little I sin or how much I pray. The first time I remember something happening to me was about a month after my dad made that deal. I was in my tiny cramped room, trying to sleep on a bed I outgrew years ago, while my brothers and dad watched a movie downstairs when I saw it. This thing in my closet. It was pale with gaunt, sunken eyes and a gaping mouth. Its long and bony fingers wrapped around my closet door. There was no question that this thing was a demon. I immediately cried for my dad, who stomped up the stairs and gave me a proper beating for interrupting his movie night with his kids. After that, he called me a little girl for crying and locked me in my room. As I cried all that night, the demon simply watched me from the closet, unmoving. Demons watching me were pretty normal from then on. Sometimes it would be the pale gaunt thing in my closet, other times a dark figure hovering over my bed, and on bad nights a horned figure with growing red eyes would stare at me, taunting me through the window. After a while, I stopped being scared of them. One night, when I was 9, the gaunt creature was back in my closet, staring at me while I read. He began to make this really weird growling noise, to which I shushed him. He then did something he never did before. While he would occasionally wrap his hand around my slightly ajar door, he never actually came out of my closet, until that night. In one swift movement, he tore open my closet door and stood up fully, revealing he was taller than the ceiling itself. He bent his neck in an abnormal way to fit under the roof. I rightfully should have been afraid at this moment, but for some reason, I just wasn't that scared. We locked eyes for a moment, which was more awkward than scary, so I just went back to reading my book. He just looked at me curiously for a while, until my dad decided he wanted to be a horrible person again, and threw open my door to yell at me for something or other. The entire time, the demon just watched. Thankfully, my dad left after slapping me across the face, but I was crying again for the rest of the night. The demon, who now looked at me with something more than curiosity, looked back at my closed door, trying to see my dad. As I did nothing but sob, the demon just sat down beside my bed, towering over me. Neither of us looked at each other for the rest of the night. I cried while he just stared off in the distance, but I wasn't alone, and that was all I cared about. From then on, things changed. I wasn't just not scared of the demons, I welcomed them, especially the gaunt-looking one who sat by me that night. He would sit with me whenever my dad was bad to me, or whenever I had bad troubles at school. He never talked at me and barely ever looked at me, but all I cared about was that he was there for me. I even gave him a name, Papa. I remember this one night. I was 14 and upset because Jacob, the boy I liked, didn't invite me to the Valentine's dance at our school. On top of that, my dad had gotten into one of his moods and had thrown a chair at me. When I ran into my room, I was almost relieved to see Papa crouched by the closet. "Papa?" I cried, running to him. It was stupid, I know. I was calling a literal demon Papa, but I had nobody else. He was the only one who had ever shown me any sympathy. At first, he stepped back, but as I cried even harder, he looked at me in the eyes. Maybe for the first time since that night, he stepped out of the closet. Then, he did something surprising. He hugged me back, as I felt his icy cold hands wrap around me. I should have been terrified, but I was filled with love. Love for finally finding a dad who loved me. But one night, as I was reading To Kill a Mockingbird for my school project, I made a mistake. Papa looked curious, so I decided to read out loud to him. I guess I made too much noise though, because David opened my door. "Lilith, who the hell are you? What the hell is that?" he screamed, and my dad came rushing up. Papa couldn't hide in time, and now Anthony, David, and my dad all stared him down. He stood up, revealing his giant stature, and David began to cry, while Anthony froze in place and my dad ran off to get a vial of holy water he had kept by his bedside ever since the deal was made. As I tried to run away with Papa, he stopped me and shook his head. We both knew it was too late. I cried as I hugged him goodbye, and as my dad approached us with the holy water and sprayed it on Papa, he let out a blood-curdling screech that could have been heard across the country. I watched in horror as Papa, who had stayed by my side all these years, faded to nothingness. "There, it can't hurt us anymore, sons," he said, embracing David and Anthony in a hug. I just laid over Papa's lifeless body, uncontrollably sobbing. We were all so caught up in our own worlds, we didn't notice something come up behind us. He was large, even bigger than Papa, and had 2 large horns, a goat's head, and a large stick in his hand. Dad turned around slowly, looking at this thing as he glared down at my abuser. "Your Majesty, We had a deal, Stanley. I granted you 15 more years of life on 2 conditions. 2. It boomed, and I noticed David had wet himself. "It was a misunderstanding, sir, my daughter. You were granted 15 years of life on the condition that I get your daughter upon her death. And you never harm anyone ever again, do you understand?" it asked. "Yes, and I haven't. Promise." The creature laughed. "First you break a promise, and now you lie? To his satanic majesty himself. Seeing you have not only harmed your daughter her entire life, but have killed one of my best minions. You have broken my trust. I'm breaking off the deal." My dad got down on his knees. "No, please, I'll do anything," he begged. Satan looked at me. "There is only one way. If Lilith, your daughter, the one you cursed, forgives you, I will set you free and you will live the rest of your life." My dad slowly turned to me and put on a smile. "Hey Lily, what about it? Look at me, I'm your dad. Your Papa. I raised you. Don't you love me? I'm your dad, for God's sake." he said, getting more agitated as I stared at him.
It's up to you, Lilith,
Satan said. I looked at Papa's body on the floor, then back to my dad. Come on, you gonna believe Satan or your dear old dad? My dad said, pleading to me. I glared at him. My dad is dead. You killed him, I said. I don't forgive you. And with that, Satan dragged my dad down to the netherworld. My brothers and I hearing his screams until it was far away enough that it faded out, to where he could never hurt me again. As my brothers cried in the loss of their dad, I walked back to Papa on the ground and kissed his forehead. Goodbye, Papa. Thank you. I know what you're thinking, who cares about AM radio anyways? And up until a few months ago, I would have agreed with you. But then, something happened. I think it was a weird feeling of morbid curiosity beyond anything else. I've always loved the radio. And I still had a few local FM radio staples that I listened to frequently. It was almost like a ritual for me to settle down in my room in the evening, grab a drink, and put on some classic rock at 105.9 FM. One night, out of boredom more than anything else, I switched my alarm clock radio setting to AM, and started switching through the stations. Most of what I heard was a bunch of static in between talk radio stations. Felt like I was wasting my time. But I kept going. Felt like if I tried hard enough, I could maybe find some sort of gem of a station. I turned the radio dial to its very fringes, and at the absolute edge of accessible AM channels, I started to hear a whisper in between the static. It took a few minutes to get the station quite right. It was so hard to hear clearly that it almost felt like the station was keeping itself hidden or something. But I was now there, listening intently to this weird, hidden, whispery station. How do you have fun, stranger? Was the voice from the radio, whispered yet croaky. Strange, it felt like it was the start of a monologue. So I waited for a follow-up. Instead, silence for a minute. Then, well, the voice followed up. I laughed. It felt like the station was maybe all about playing a prank on the listener or something. Just to play along, I followed up with something stupid. Getting late, I guess, I said half-jokingly at the radio. I knew it was a bit crazy, but I wanted to commit to the bit. About another minute of silence, and then, "Thank you for trusting me with your secret," came the voice from the radio. Huh? I kind of shrugged it off and thought, "You're welcome," in my head. But I left it there. I kept listening after that, but it was a bunch of very incomprehensible whispering. Almost felt like it was in some sort of other language. I eventually tuned it out and went back to my standard evening ritual. A few days passed and I thought, what the hell? I switched the radio back to AM, spent that agonizing few minutes getting the dial just right, and returned to the station with the croaky whispering. Something strange happened. It's almost like when I fully tuned in, the speaker on the other side was aware. Almost immediately, he stopped his whispering and there was silence coming from the radio. And then, "Hello friend, do you want to know how I have fun?" What? Yes, I'd love to know how you have fun. I said to my clock radio more formally than I anticipated. Silence. Then, "Can I trust you with my secret?" the voice asked. I was still weirdly convinced this whole thing was pre-recorded or something. There was always a good amount of silence between when I answered and when the radio voice would actually respond again. "Yes, you can trust me," I said. "Good." The voice responded immediately. The promptness of the response took me aback. "How I like to have fun is," the voice continued, "I like to drink." "Oh," I responded. "That's actually super normal. I think we all do if I'm being honest." Silence. Did I offend him or something? "People, I like to drink people," he said. "What?" Silence from the radio. I didn't say anything back this time. I just stared, wondering. What kind of AM station would be pulling a long-running horror bit like this? Just seemed weird. A few minutes passed, still nothing but silence. I wanted to switch the station, but a part of me didn't feel comfortable making a move. Finally, he broke his silence. "My secret is safe with you, yes?" I couldn't muster up a response, so I just kind of nodded. "Thank you," he responded. I was tense. Thankfully, he switched over to his whispery gibberish after that. I let a few more minutes pass, and then I switched back to FM and called it a night. The experience was weird enough that I spent a lot of the next day Googling around for the names and details of all the local AM stations. Turns out there wasn't a recorded station anywhere near where I had taken my AM dial. I looked up some of the details of the station. Low whispering in another language, an AM channel that asks for secrets, and likewise, couldn't muster anything up. I did the mature thing and decided to move on with my life. That was until 2 weeks ago. I came home drunk on a Friday night, and I felt curious. This time, I was armed with liquid courage. So I turned on my clock radio, switched to AM, and went to the fringes of my dial like I always used to. Something strange happened this time. The station was gone. I was sure of it. There was no low whispering, no familiar voice, just a sea of static as I scrolled through. I started going back through prior AM stations, looking for any sort of familiar signal. I must have spent an hour doing this. Finally, I'd taken the dial all the way to the other end, the other fringe of stations. It was more of a last-ditch effort than anything else, and surprisingly enough, I heard that croaky whispering again in between all of the static. I hunkered down and honed in on the station until I was fully tuned in. There he was, whispering, faster than usual this time. I heard laughter between his whispers this time. It felt like this was a more energetic broadcast. It took him a few minutes this time to realize I was there. Slowly, his whispering dissipated. We were back in our silence together. I was able to have a drink. "You were?" I said back. Silence. "I'm grateful for those who keep secrets. Your trust allowed me to have fun," said the voice. "As your friend, I'd love to know more details," I said back. Keep in mind I was drunk, and had convinced myself this was all bull. A pause. It was around 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. I'm pretty sure sober me would have switched stations at this point, but I was determined. The same weird feeling that made me chase AM radio in the first place was making me stay. Finally, "Thank you for letting me share my story," he said. He wasn't whispering this time. His voice was incredibly clear. It sounded otherworldly. I drank a family this time, a mother and a son. He proceeded to give me details, their names, where they lived, how they tasted. In between my horror, I was able to scribble down some baseline details. He went on for longer than I thought. I wanted to get up and record some of this, but it felt like I couldn't move. It felt like he could tell if I stopped focusing on his story. Finally, he stopped. "Thank you, friend," he said. "No worries," I said back. Silence. "If I ever need another drink, will you let me visit?" he asked. Damn, why did I tune into this station tonight? What was I thinking? I slowly moved to turn the dial. Part of me just wanted to smash the alarm right then and there. Friends should know where each other live. Will you tell me where you live? My hand was closer to the dial. Are you Michael? Is your address 51? I turned away, flicked the switch back to FM, and then I'll level with you. I smashed the damn thing right after. In case you were wondering, yes, he had my first name right, and it sounded like he was en route to getting my address correct as well. I couldn't sleep that night. I haven't slept very well since. Eventually, I mustered up the courage to Google some of the details he shared with me. As it turned out, there was a very grisly crime scene in the same area he described. The names hadn't been shared to the public, but it was a mother and a son. But the weird thing was, this happened all the way on the other side of the county. So here I am now. I won't take the car with anyone. No radios of any kind in my apartment. I don't really see people anymore. I don't want to risk the chance that I accidentally tune into that station, and that creature finishes saying my address. Screw AM radio. Covert agencies have been hiding new technology from us. I can prove it. Some backstory: I work at a company that focuses entirely on destroying classified documents. We go through a plethora of background checks and interviews to make sure that we're trustworthy. So I'm taking a massive risk even writing this. I'm hoping that because I'm keeping myself anonymous, I won't be traced. I can't tell you where my company is, the name, or what agency we work for, because they would be able to find me. Anyways, I don't usually give the documents I'm destroying much of a second thought. We use industrial-sized shredders and everyone works quickly, so I tend to turn my mind off and just shred. But this folder was odd right off the bat. It was out of place. The file material was ink black and shiny. As cheesy as it sounds, it looked straight out of a sci-fi movie. I don't know what overcame me, but I felt like I needed to see what was inside. When no one was looking, I stuffed the folder into my waistband and took a bathroom break. When I was in the bathroom, I opened the folder, and to my surprise, there was one single piece of paper, double-sided. It was nothing special, just a transcript written in 12-point font. The date was weird though. I thought it must have been a typo, because the year on it was 2043. And unless this was some failed attempt at a screenplay or a sci-fi story, that wasn't possible. I know you probably won't believe me, but the agency that we work for is the real deal. They don't make things up. They work on very serious stuff. And that's why I haven't been able to sleep. It's not physically possible for that paper to be here. unless time travel already exists. On top of that, the transcript in the folder is highly unsettling. The events it speaks of are also only dated as 16 years from now, which in the grand scheme of things is not very far away at all. I've decided to share this here because I'm hoping someone can give me a more plausible reason for that folder's existence. I hope to God my theory is wrong, because if it isn't, what the future holds is horrifying. The original folder and transcript are shredded, but I managed to take a photo of the document and email it to my personal computer. What I'm about to read is exactly what was on this transcript. If this post gets removed, assume they found me. Body host trial log number 34. Subject 7. May 9th, 2043. I can still remember when the first microchip was created. They had been invented 5 years ago in the year 2038 by Incom, a high-tech firm focused on body regeneration and prolonging life. The microchips, which were fittingly called body host, had been built with a singular purpose: to allow someone to take control of another body that was not theirs, preferably younger or more fit. This concept had been dreamt of time and time again in old sci-fi comics and novels, but had never come to fruition until now. It was, to say in the least, earth-shattering, but came at a price. The chips were extremely expensive, and bodies were hard to find. This meant two things: only the rich could afford to body jump, and usable bodies were always in demand. The former wasn't particularly problematic, because most projects in their early stages are only available to the 1%. The latter was more of an issue because it meant that a new doorway was open to the poor and the weak, or the desperate to escape their respective struggles. The first year went smoothly enough, with a handful of the ultra-rich taking over the bodies of some test subjects who'd joined on the promise of a handful of money. The chips did have their limitations. Body jumping was temporary, and users would experience small side effects once they had returned to their original vessel. On top of this, if the user's body host died, they would die as well. This was seen as a failsafe, a method to stop users from being reckless with a body that was not theirs. These trials did not raise any red flags, except for one subject who forgot how to speak English once he had returned. Regardless, this was chalked up to a mechanical error, and body host chips began to make their way into the mainstream market. Year 2 was mostly uneventful, but one crucial change would impact the future of body host. Like any product that is difficult to acquire, demand increases. It was inevitable that the general population would see these life-altering microchips and want their chance to body jump. Because of this, black market hackers raided body host depots to steal microchips that they would later sell for astronomical prices. Once the company got word of this, they rapidly deployed teams of mercenaries to their factories and warehouses, but the wheels had already been set in motion. The same hackers who had managed to steal body host chips dissected them one piece at a time, creating blueprints to manufacture their own versions, which they called half-hosts. Once these plans had been created, almost every underground electronics dealer had a copy. This may have seemed like an honorable endeavor on the surface, but it was far from positive. These kingpins, who now had more money than they could ever spend, had used cheap replacement parts to substitute expensive rare earth metals and circuitry to build their body host clones. Those who used these microchips were playing a game of Russian roulette, as the side effects of a defective chip could be permanent. Now that year 2 was over, there was an increased number of half-hosts on the market, and the demand for vacant bodies grew exponentially. Users resorted to desperate measures to fill this need, and what ensued was terrifying. The homeless, prostitutes, and other rejects of society were taken against their will and possessed, only to be later abandoned on the streets with life-altering brain injuries and other side effects. There were whispers in the shadiest bars and nightclubs that some psychos had even begun using half-hosts on unsuspecting animals, only to experience cerebral hemorrhages and mild dementia, as the rich continued to use their body hosts to walk a mile in another man's shoes. Society's underbelly committed heinous acts upon their fellow citizens. There were not enough problems for the government to outlaw possession and body jumping, but that would soon change. Year 4 was when the body host industry began to have an extremely negative impact on society. This was mostly because of a new development that had occurred, once again caused by the same underground hackers who had created Half-Host. In some trials, they found a way to tweak the circuitry on the microchips to allow users to avoid death even if it happened to their body host. This new, innovative tactic began being added to every new Half-Host chip, plunging users into a world of chaos. Underground fighting rings popped up, with kidnapped and homeless bodies being used as cannon fodder. Users who wanted to feel what death was like began committing suicide. The thoughtful ones would hide in a dark corner with a shotgun in their mouth, while the psychopaths and fanatics would level a street block with a bomb vest, or drive into a busy freeway. As more and more bodies began turning up, and non-user casualties increased, the government decided to step in. Body host, half-host, and any other form of body jumping technology was only to be used in regulated facilities by approved individuals. What the government did not realize was that they had invariably taken away what society's most desperate individuals had seen as their one escape from a monotonous life. To add on to this, the rich were not happy that the poor had spoiled their fun. Why should they stay in boring government facilities while some slob could go on an adrenaline-filled killing spree? Year 5 was when the rich broke into the underground microchip market. Year 5 was when a gang of terrorists disguised by body hosts stormed the government building and murdered the entire parliament. Year 5 was when all hell broke loose. With a broken government and little to no regulation, body host facilities became easy targets for well-armed factions that had now popped up all over the city. Microchip factories were taken over, and began to produce thousands of body hosts a day, flooding the market. Car accidents, shootings, suicides, and fistfights were commonplace, and those who had been lucky enough not to have been kidnapped or killed barricaded their homes or fled. As food and water became scarce, the neighboring cities put up military blockades around us, not allowing anyone in or out, and killing those who attempted it. It seemed that they knew how fast this electronic plague spread, and wanted nothing to do with it. This takes us to now. I lost my son to a body host murder, and my wife is missing. I can't sleep. My right eye has developed an awful twitch, and I have found myself overcome by random panic attacks now, that I have no one but my own thoughts for company. My food and water are dwindling, and I lost power yesterday. All I can smell is my own filth and the eye-watering stench of the burning building nearby. I am truly at a breaking point. I'm packing my bags and I'm going to make a run for it. I woke up abruptly just as my body host was hit by a car full of looters. It felt anticlimactic to have made the decision to try and escape the city. I think I should have opted for suicide instead. My friend had told me the feeling was one of a kind. Regardless, I was quite glad to have been chosen to take part in Body Host's final trial, which was done on a citywide scale. Not our city, of course. The company executives had chosen an isolated one across the world for that, and our military had ensured there would be no loose ends. I decided that when the committee voted on whether they should introduce this new technology to the public, I would most likely say no. If that city had crashed and burned, I could only imagine what it would do to ours. Maybe someday it would happen. If not during my time, then perhaps during that of my children. But if that was the case, I always had my villa on the coast of Italy. Update: I truly fear for my safety. Ever since I posted this, I haven't felt like myself. I've been sleeping less, eating less, and I haven't gone to work. Even though I want to, it's almost as though my body just won't let me. I feel my sanity slipping away from me. I'm too afraid to call the police, and I don't want to accidentally implicate my friends and family. If you've listened this far, please, for the love of God, don't speak of what I've posted here to anyone. Save a copy of the transcript to your computer and remove any evidence that you visited this post. They could be watching any one of you as we speak. After I record this, I'm going to destroy my computer and cover my tracks. God, help us all.